I was hoping there would be more people here, given how many people actually know about this event. But looks like a different kind of protest. Anyhow, my name is Daniel Caldwell, the TSU Federalist Society Chapter President. I'll begin by reading the Federalist Society mission statement, followed by brief introductions of our guest speakers. The Federalist Society is a nonpartisan, conservative and libertarian organization dedicated to fostering balanced and open debate about the fundamental principles of freedom, federalism, and judicial restraint. The Federalist Society seeks to educate the legal community through its programs and publications about how limited constitutional government based on the rule of law can have a positive effect on law and public policy. Our speakers, you probably already know of: Josh Blackman, Associate Professor of Law at the South Texas College of Law in Houston. He is one of the constitutional law professors specializing in the U.S. Supreme Court and an author of a number of books, as well as having been featured in Forbes magazine, having testified to the House Judiciary Committee, and I'm not going to give you his whole resume. I think we'd rather get to this substance of the discussion. Meanwhile, Brett Busby is a justice on the 14th Court of Appeals who was appointed by Governor Rick Perry in 2012 and then elected to the full term later that year. He was a partner at Bracewell and Giuliani LLP, and he is a former adjunct professor at the University of Texas Law School, where he taught the U.S. Supreme Court litigation plan. With that, I would like to turn the time over to our speakers to introduce our topic as they see it, and I'm sure there will be plenty of time at the end for question and answer. And I'd also like to invite Professor Champion up as a volunteer to moderate the discussion.
Thank you, Daniel. We appreciate your inviting us, and it's a pleasure to be here with my friend Professor Blackman to talk with you a little bit about what's been captioned controversial conversations. And what we'd like to do, I'm going to set the stage a little bit for this discussion in talking about, in particular, the First Amendment and the importance that the U.S. Supreme Court has placed on using the First Amendment to protect expression of dissenting views, and I'm going to give a little bit of a historical view of that and how the First Amendment protects views that may not necessarily be popular or preferred. Then we're going to, Professor Blackman's going to talk a little bit about how some of those principles are at play in some of the issues that we see today. So just generally to take it to a 50,000-foot level and talk a little bit about the First Amendment and protection of freedom of speech. Generally, speech is protected against limitation by state actors, which includes a wide variety of state, federal, and local government actors, including government schools, both higher education, and we'll talk a little bit about cases about how that applies in the grade school context as well. With some exceptions, and those exceptions are fairly limited. There are things like libel and slander, obviously, that aren't protected by the First Amendment. Things like fighting words or incitement to violence are obviously not protected as well. And then there's less protection for some categories of commercial type speech. But beyond that, the Supreme Court has been very, in the modern era at least, has been very firm about saying that government cannot regulate offensive or derogatory speech just because the government disagrees with the content of the speech that's expressed. And there really, in the modern era, haven't been exceptions to that don't fall into one of the categories that I mentioned earlier. And so if you go back, some of the cases where this started, the Supreme Court started developing this line of doctrine around World War I, when there were some protests against people being involved in the war. And there were the Schenck case and the Abrams case, which were cases where people were out trying to protest the war and trying to disrupt war production and also the draft system. And at that time, the U.S. Supreme Court said that speech was a clear and present danger and could be regulated. And then they followed that up with a case about burning a draft card, U.S. versus O'Brien. You all may be familiar with this one. And that was a case where there was a prohibition on that somebody burned a draft card and was charged with doing that, and to protest the war, and was charged and argued that violated his First Amendment rights of free expression and free speech, because he was protesting the war by burning the draft card. And what the U.S. Supreme Court said in that case was that saying not to burn the draft card had just an incidental effect on speech. It wasn't prohibiting him from saying that he didn't like the draft. Burning the draft card, according to the Supreme Court in this earlier era of its jurisprudence, said, well, that's just an incidental effect on speech, saying you can't burn your draft card, and it's really important to have an efficient draft system, and the cards are essential for that. So that was the Supreme Court's early approach. And then we move into some cases like, for example, Cohen versus California, where in the more modern era, people are protesting the draft, and there's a guy wearing a draft jacket that says "expletive the draft."
Fuck
right?
the draft. I can say that, he can't.
So you've got that case, and he's convicted of disturbing the peace under a part of the statute that regulates offensive conduct. If you engage in offensive conduct, then you can be charged under this state statute in California for disturbing the peace. And so he challenged his conviction, saying that it violated the First Amendment, and the U.S. Supreme Court agreed with that and said that this was, and distinguished O'Brien, the draft card burning case, by saying, well, this is speech, not conduct, having the jacket on with the message on it. And then they said, so the argument was, the statute says offensive conduct, and so California was saying, why can't we regulate offensive conduct? And what the U.S. Supreme Court said was that banning speech that the government considers offensive destroys the marketplace of ideas that the framers had in mind when they put the First Amendment into place originally. And so that idea of the marketplace of ideas has really animated the Supreme Court's jurisprudence, that part of what the framers were doing in reaction against what England had done is to say, we don't want the state shutting down open debate over ideas, even if some people consider them offensive. And so you saw several other cases in this line. One I alluded to earlier, Tinker versus Des Moines Independent School District, where a student wore a black armband to school. This was a grade school student, and to protest the war. And he got disciplined by the school and challenged that under the First Amendment. And the school said, the U.S. Supreme Court said you can't punish a student for wearing a black armband to express, his opposition to the war, which at that time was a controversial view. And then we have Texas versus Johnson, burning an American flag. There were federal and state statutes that prohibited the burning of an American flag. And the U.S. Supreme Court struck that statute down under the First Amendment and said, obviously there are a lot of people that feel extremely strongly that you should not burn the American flag, but that's part of what the First Amendment protects, is even offensive speech, because that, it may subject you to other kinds of consequences for having that speech, but it can't subject you to punishment by the state for having that sort of view. And so the idea here is that it's important to hear dissenting views, even if they're expressed in offensive or distasteful ways, in order to get attention, because, that's sometimes how you get people to focus on what you're saying. In these cases, people have chosen, controversial ways to express themselves in order to draw attention to what they're trying to express. And so the Supreme Court has said that the fact that the speech is offensive doesn't deprive it of First Amendment protection. And so I'll move into a few of the more modern cases out of the draft context where we've seen this. One was RAB versus City of St. Paul, and this was a cross-burning case, obviously very controversial decision and a type of speech that is widely condemned. What the Supreme Court said in that case is that there was a statute that's prohibited the display of a symbol in a way that would arouse certain feelings in the person observing it based on race, religion, gender, some other categories. And the U.S. Supreme Court, in a unanimous 9-0 opinion, said that violates the First Amendment because you can't prohibit speech because you disapprove of the ideas expressed. Going back to these other cases, the draft cases and these other cases. And as long as there's no physical manifestation of violence or incitement to violence that goes along with it, because that gets into the exception that we discussed earlier. And there are some other cases. There's Brandenburg versus Ohio, where Ohio tried to punish a member of the Ku Klux Klan who had announced plans for a march on Washington, and the Supreme Court held that that speech was protected because there was no imminent incitement to violence. And again, the idea in that case that the Supreme Court is carrying through these cases is just because you find that speech offensive or distasteful, and a lot of people would, obviously, that's not a reason for the state to regulate it under the First Amendment. And then, more recently than that, the Snyder versus Phelps case, and this was the one that was in the news a few years ago with the Westboro Baptist Church and the people coming to protest at service members' funerals. And obviously causing a lot of distress to people who are there to mourn their loved ones who passed away. And the people are there saying, that this is God's judgment on service members because the country is too accepting in their view of homosexuality. So obviously that's a view that is widely condemned, but the U.S. Supreme Court said in that case that that speech is protected as well. It can't be banned because, again, it's based on this principle that we've been talking about, that when you're prohibiting speech based on the ideas that are being expressed, that's not something that the First Amendment allows. And I'll just mention that this is, in the educational context, there's another principle that goes along with this that's not mandated by the Constitution, and that's a principle of academic freedom. And it was really interesting to me a few years ago now, the University of Chicago appointed a panel of experts from across the university there to think about this, because the University of Chicago and some other schools are not public institutions, so they're not directly bound by the First Amendment, and they have to decide for themselves how do they deal with this issue. If you're not bound by the First Amendment, do you want to prohibit the expression of certain ideas? And what they decided at Chicago, and this has been something that's been emulated by a lot of other private institutions of higher learning and private schools at all levels, is that no, they didn't want to do that. And one of the things, I'll just mention a few things from here that I think are relevant to the discussion to set the stage for some of the things that Professor Blackman is going to talk about, and hopefully some of the dialogue and questions that we'll have later. One of the things that it says is that the cure for ideas that we oppose lies through open discussion rather than through inhibition, and that education should not be intended to make people comfortable, it's meant to make them think. And again, from a later part of the statement, it's not the proper role of a university to attempt to shield individuals from ideas and opinions they find unwelcome, disagreeable, or even deeply offensive. And that concerns about civility and mutual respect can never be used as a justification for closing off discussion of ideas, however offensive or disagreeable those ideas may be to some members of the community. And of course it goes on to say the university may reasonably regulate the time, place, and manner of expression to ensure that it doesn't disrupt university activities. But it reiterates a fundamental commitment to the principle that debate or deliberation may not be suppressed because the ideas put forth are thought by some or even by most members of the community to be offensive, unwise, immoral, or wrong-headed. Their view is that it's for the individual members of the community, not for the university as an institution, to make those judgments for themselves and to act on those judgments not by suppressing the speech that they disagree with, but by openly and vigorously contesting ideas that they oppose. So this just sets the stage for how the U.S. Supreme Court is viewing some of these discussions on ideas that may be even deeply offensive to people and dissenting views, and also how some private universities are looking at it. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Professor Blackman for some comments on how some of these issues are coming up in current events. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome, and my dear colleague and friend, Justice Busby. Also, thank you for not protesting us. The last time the federal site had an event here, you made the local news, so I think we're okay. We're not going to make the news tonight, and it's going to hustle us out the room, so we're okay here. And I'm grateful that the chapter here invited Justice Busby to speak about a really, really important topic, which is free speech. Historically, college campuses were places where it was understood we needed to have a wide range of speeches available. And whether or not you're on a state institution, and this is a state institution, there's a very strong norm of what's called academic freedom that Justice Busby alluded to, that ideas should not be silenced merely because you find them offensive. So let me give you an example. Let's say I was a law professor 30 years ago, and I wanted to come here to TSU and give a lecture on why I thought the Constitution protects a right to same-sex marriage. Whoa, right? I would have been laughed off campus. There would have been protesters who said, "Get out of here, Josh. This is evil. Sodomy against the law in Texas, right? This is immoral. I'm bothered by this." But had protesters done that, I would hope that the administration of this school or any school said, no, let the guy speak, right? Let him give his speech. Now, this is not a hypothetical. There indeed have been scholars speaking about the Constitution and same-sex marriage for decades. And they were probably laughed at, and they were, jeered at, and people probably booed them, hissed at them. But I'll tell you what, over a couple of decades, those ideas gained force and gained respectability, and then you have 5 lawyers in the Supreme Court who made it the law of the land. So that's often how ideas go, right? An idea that may seem unpopular, obnoxious today, may become the Supreme Court's next 5-4 decision, or it may become just crap, and no one will ever listen to it again. But you don't know which idea is going to be the crap one, and which one's going to be the law of the land, which is why the marketplace of ideas, which Justice Busby eloquently described, requires you to have these sorts of debates. Now, if we had speech codes back in the 1960s and 70s, I could have never given that speech. People giving people giving speeches in civil rights would not have been allowed to speak with these sorts of speech codes. Why? If something bothers me, something offends me, and I can just silence that person, the speech is never made. Now, I am very happy this room right here is very receptive, very welcoming, but that's not always the case. And we're seeing increasingly on various campuses, the remedy to this sort of offensive speech is to shout the person down, to boo them out the door, even engaging in acts of physical violence. Brett and I were joking earlier, if anyone tries to touch me, I'm running out the door. But you see this at different schools where people are breaking windows, lighting stuff on fire, right? Engaging in acts of trespass. All because of ideas that they don't like. So the dirty little secret is the way to respond to speech you don't like is with more speech. At every single academic event I've ever been to, and I think Justice Busby would agree, there's always a Q&A period, right? Always at the end, you get your time for Q&A. You can respond, you can react, you can engage. Go up and talk to the speaker afterwards. But the worst thing to do is shouting someone down. And you don't have to take my word for it. I'm going to quote Bernie. Yes, Bernie Sanders. I know you probably all feel the burn, right? Still feeling it. So a couple months ago, Ann Coulter is this right-wing provocateur. I don't particularly like her views. But she was invited to speak at Berkeley, and they kicked her out. They wouldn't let her speak. And Bernie says, let me give you Bernie's quote. He says, "I don't like this. Obviously, Ann Coulter's outrageous. To my mind, off the wall. Off the wall, right, Bernie? But people have a right to give their 2 cents, give a speech without fear of violence and intimidation." Bernie says, "It's a sign of intellectual weakness. If you can't ask Ann Coulter in a polite way a question to expose the weaknesses of her arguments, if all you can do is boo or shut her down or prevent her from coming, what does that tell you? What are you afraid of, her ideas? ask her the hard questions, confront her intellectually. Booing people down or intimidating people, that's not the way it works. And I agree with Bernie. And I'll even use an example. When I was in college, I was an Ann Coulter fan. I actually liked her. And then one day she came to Penn State where I was a student, and she gave her firebrand speech, like, yeah, go Ann. And I got up there, I got to the microphone, I asked her a question. What was my question? I said, you know, something about Israel, I can't remember what it was, something about Israel. And she said, you know what, Israel is America's pimp, or something like that. I was like, what did you say? What stupid thing did you just say to me? I'm asking you a question about foreign policy, you give me this and that. What are you talking? You want to know what happened? I stopped buying her books. I stopped buying her books after that. I thought she was an idiot. I'm like, wow. She just, you know, I was, what, 19, 20 years old, asking her a question, you know, big auditorium. I was a little nervous, right? Got the microphone, maybe 500 people there. Pimp. Okay. So we got off the draft, we got over hot words in here for today. But the point I'm trying to convey is, when you see someone stupid say something stupid, you realize they're dumb. And by asking a question to them, you can point out the stupid. You can point out why their arguments are bad. The alternative, though, is what's often called the heckler's veto. Okay, so what's the heckler's veto? By you giving a loud speech and you making this commotion and noise and prevent them from speaking, you are infringing their free speech rights. So you have to keep it separate. So but now I want to talk about the harder cases, right? Hate speech, right? Well, what is this thing called hate speech? Joseph Busby mentioned a case from about 20 years ago, actually I'm 30 now, getting older, RAV versus St. Paul from the early 1990s. And yet the city of Minneapolis, I'm sorry, St. Paul, Twin Cities, tried to ban what they called hate speech, and it involved even cross burning, right? They tried to actually criminalize the act of burning a cross. And it was a 9-0 opinion. They didn't agree on the rationale. It was a 9-0 opinion, and the court said that this is content-based restrictions, that by trying to punish pure speech merely because of the intent behind it is problematic. So a question that always comes up, and I'm anticipating what you'll ask later, is, but Josh, what if, you know, we're not talking about Ann Coulter, we're talking about Richard Spencer, right? This is this alt-right guy who, tiki torch, right? The guy marching in Charlottesville. True story, I was in Charlottesville that weekend by chance. My friend was getting married in Charlottesville the weekend of that thing. And I was driving back from the rehearsal dinner, and I'm like, what are those lights over there? I was like, oh my God, there's torches. It was bizarre. But now the question is, what happens if someone wants to invite, like a Richard Spencer, to a college? The best thing to do to him is to simply ignore him. They want you to come out. They want you to fight back. They want you to start, you know, tussling in the street. They want you to make a scene. That's what gives these people energy. So when they come to college campuses and at state institutions, they can't be denied entry. Simply ignore them. Now, another argument people are raising, wait a minute, Josh, you gave an example of giving a lecture on same-sex marriage, right? That's promoting justice, that's good. And then you have Richard Spencer talking about bringing us back to the days of antebellum, bringing us back before the Civil War, right? That's bad. I'm with you. I agree with that emphatically. But we don't know how people react to different ideas. And if your answers are shut it down, don't let the person speak, you actually, whether you realize it or not, give energy to the other side. Because people think, wow, maybe I should be listening to this guy. They don't want to speak. You know, it's like when your mom says don't do something, and then you really want to do it, right? Mom says don't go there, you really want to do it. By shutting someone down, you give them more attention. So my usual response to people who say dumb things is to ignore them. Whether it's on college campuses, on Twitter, in the New York Times, whatever it is, I simply ignore them, right? Let them do right? Let them do what they want to do, and you do your own thing. Now, I want to finish up, and we'll turn to some comments and Q&A in a minute, of saying what you can all do to help, only you can stop foreign parts, right? What you can do to help free speech. My number one piece of advice, never be quiet. Except when someone's speaking, then be respectful. But when it's your time to speak, always voice your opinion. Whether you're in class, whether you're over here, whether you're on the campus, always speak your mind. That will ensure the other side stays on their toes. Because I'll tell you, I give these speeches all the time, just as Busby speaks a lot. I sometimes get a question from a student, like, wow, that's a good question. I hadn't considered that. And I'll say, well, here's my tentative answer. And I go back to my office and I think about it. So by you speaking your mind at every possible juncture, You are forcing the other speaker to engage and develop their ideas, right? So if someone comes here and says something dumb, you hit them with a hard question, like, why'd you vote for that bill, right? Why would you say that on the Texas floor, right? Why would you say it in the Texas Capitol, okay? Put them on the spot. If I say something dumb, or Justice Busby is very smart, he will not, but if I say something dumb, hit me with it, right? I love when my students challenge me. It actually makes me very happy that they're paying attention. But never stay quiet. And let me tell you why. If you have a thought, I promise you 10 other people in your class have the same thought, but they may be embarrassed to raise their hand, right? They may be embarrassed to stand out. But if you take the lead and you show the initiative, you signal to the other people in the class, okay, I'm not alone here. Other people share this idea. And if enough people agree to something, go back to same-sex marriage. This was an idea that was unthinkable 20, 30 years ago. It's unthinkable. Now it's law of the land. So don't be afraid. Don't blow it. You'll all be lawyers. God willing, you'll pass the bar, right? Professor Champion, we're all going to pass the bar. God willing, you're going to work your tails off. You're going to pass the bar. And when you're lawyers, always speak up, except for the judges, be respectful, but always use your voice. I'll stop here, and then maybe we'll have some Q&A and some dialogue, but I do want your questions. We reserved a lot of time, but I want to hear what you all think. Thank you so much.
Testing, 1, 2. All right, cool beans. All right, hi. I didn't get an introduction, which I'm very offended by. I'm kidding. Basically, I want to tell you a little about myself, and then I'm going to go into the discussion here. My name is Logan Scott. I endear to be a politician in the future. Right now, I'm a freshman at this college, and I'm 18 years old. This is my first time doing a speech like this, so I'm a little nervous, but I'm glad to see you all here today and hear the discussion that we're going to have. All right. So, a major thing that's coming up and that's being focused on today is the open discussion of ideas, and that no matter how terrible the idea is, it's open for valid discussion, and it should be. I have very mixed feelings about this. I personally detest the ideas that like Richard Spencer and them come up with. And I understand that people think that they have every right to speak, and by Constitution they do. But just because it's inside the Constitution, I don't think that necessarily means it's moral. A big reason I don't think that hate speech is moral, and hate speech defined as like they're saying that one race is inferior and one should take over, or something along those lines. Anything that's clearly defined as hate speech, I don't think should be actually accepted underneath the First Amendment, because to me that is an indictment of violence. If you say that you want to put forth an ethno-state, or you want to make one race supreme, or you want to punish another race, then in itself, and you're preaching that idea, to me, you're preaching for violence. If you have the ideas going forth that one race is inferior and that they're going to be punished or they're going to be subjugated, or that they do not have the same rights as you, that to me is violence, because if you're preaching those ideas, that means you're trying to enforce them, and if you enforce them, that in itself is violence. I think a lot of stuff that they bring up is very valid. If they're going over the open discussion of ideas, and going into how you should actually just ignore those people. You shouldn't go to there, you shouldn't give them anything to fight back against. I think that in itself is also a problem. Because if you don't fight against bad ideas, they're just going to spread without your knowing. If you completely ignore someone who's speaking, who brings up hate speech, and you don't attack them on their points, and if you don't make it known in a civil way that what they're saying is wrong and that they really should not be saying it, then that's how the ideas actually spread. If you're talking about, like Richard Spencer, he's a good example. Most people didn't know about him until Charlottesville. His ideas weren't openly challenged, and had they never gone up, it wouldn't have been a problem in the first place. The main reason that his ideas and the things that he wants to put in place, or a company, I guess, wants to put in place, is that they're, by definition, harmful to the American people, right? And I understand that the examples they were bringing up before about the 70s and gays being married, that to them was a harmful idea. And I understand that it can be brought both ways, but I think society nowadays has a good understanding of moral, because it's not corrupted generally by past impressions, or you're not raised anymore to think one person is less than another. You're not raised anymore to be taught that one person is inferior to another, or that one lifestyle is inferior to another. And this is the major reasons that that was a problem back in the 70s, is that people were taught that that was not okay, that if they do that, they're breaking God's will, they're breaking God's laws, they are doing something inherently wrong. And the major thing that I want to focus on is the reason that it was thought of that it was wrong was because it was basically an ideological standpoint. And when any idea turns into an ideological standpoint, it's no longer valid and really shouldn't be talked about. I mean, you can discuss religions, and that's fine, but what I mean by ideological standpoint, I mean, there is no part that could ever be argued in your mind that you are 100% completely right and that what you're doing is right. And it's really hard to discuss this with anybody. It's hard to argue these points because then there's no actual open discussion and dialogue. And when it comes to white supremacists, or when it comes to people who vote for who want ethno states, who want actual hate speech and this stuff in place, then their ideas are become ideological. There is no point of debate because you can't have a debate with an ideology because it's correct and there's nothing to go against it. You can't have an argument with someone who's an extreme Islamic terrorist because their idea is already built into their mind. It's fact. You can't argue fact. And so the ideas really should be spread. I'm not saying that Islam shouldn't be spread. I'm just saying when it comes to a point where it's so extreme that it's impossible to change it's impossible to actually have a discussion about it, and and the things they want in place actually hurts people, then they shouldn't be allowed to say. Just as those are an open marketplace for ideas, I think there should be some sort of FDA for the marketplace of ideas. So that way you don't.
I'm supposed to be the moderator here, and that's what you're supposed to do is ask them a question.
Oh, I thought I was a guest speaker. Did you not speak?
Where?
With our guest speakers.
No, I don't think so. But all I'm asking you is that would you please ask them a question?
All right, sure. I'll forfeit the rest of my speech and I'll go on to asking them a question. Sorry about that. Was not aware that this was how it was running down.
Yes.
So, my questions are to you. Me?
No, it's fine. Let him say. Let him say.
No.
Yes,
Yeah,
ask a
no,
question,
please.
All right, sorry. Didn't mean to hold around. To hold this up. So my question to you is, do you think that even ideas that are preaching for the detriment of society should be said?
Yeah, I'll be happy to answer that question. I appreciate the introduction to that question. Yes. The entire purpose of the idea of the marketplace of ideas is to allow people to shoot down bad ideas. If someone is preaching on racial inequality or nationalism or supremacy, whatever he happens to be, the correct response is, wow, this person's absolutely insane, and they shouldn't be given any sort of audience. To the extent that these ideas appeal to people, that's certainly possible, and maybe Richard Spencer gained some Twitter followers when he goes to Charlottesville with a tiki torch, right? But the far better answer is people say that this guy is a buffoon. And you look at the reaction following the Charlottesville, it's like, no one knew this guy was. Like, oh man, this is a problem we got to deal with, right? You got to deal with this white nationalism. So I think the alternative of making people silence actually gives them more platforms and actually creates the risk of pushing them underground. Like, let them be public with their ideas and let people see how crazy they are. So the short answer is yes.
All right.
Professor Champion, any questions from the other side of the bench?
I have a lot actually coming forward.
Sorry. Yeah, go for it.
You didn't talk about the greatest case of all time, which is Morse v.
Yes.
Frederick, and it's going to be a great Darby article I'm going to do. It's called Bong Hits is Colon Kaepernick, Bong Hits for Jesus.
So the reference there, right?
And have to help out that a little bit.
Yeah, I'll help the reference.
I love saying Bong Hits for Jesus.
So let me give you guys the background of this case. It was from Alaska, wasn't it?
Yes,
I think
Anchorage.
there was a school in Anchorage, and you know when the Olympics come to town, they do the torch, right? They carry the torch to the town. So a couple of high school students had this genius idea. They're going to stand by the torch with this huge banner that said, "Bong hits for Jesus," right?
Right.
What on earth does that mean? I don't know what that means. Jesus taking a toke. I don't know. But
I'd like to think that, but no.
Bob hits for Jesus, right? And that is huge sign. And the question was whether this sort of speech can punish. So Justice Busby mentioned the Tinker case. This was, you had some students who brought a black armband, right, to protest the Vietnam War. But this case wasn't at schools outside of school. Didn't create a disruption. What was the holding of that case?
You can put bomb hits for Jesus. That's cool.
Yeah. So,
but one thing it might be because it was so confusing, we had no idea what it meant.
right, but let me give you guys a better example, right? This is actually relevant to students today. What if you have some kids in high school and they get into a fight on Facebook, and one person writes something really dumb, or really racist, or really sexist about another student on Facebook? Can that student be disciplined in a public school? See, that's actually a fairly good question, because on the one hand, let's be honest, right? Facebook fights bleed over into class, right? We all know when there's drama on social media, it spills into class. But what is the boundary of where Twitter, or whatever, right? Instagram, right? You have these Finstagrams, right? Like these fake Instagram accounts. It's a new thing. For eyebrow. But can a public school then punish a student for crap they write on Facebook or Twitter outside of class? And this is an area where it doesn't matter censorship, because you are taking away a channel that a student would have to express themselves. And just to make this a little bit easier, what if a student starts protesting the war on their Facebook account and protesting President Trump, which I'm sure no one in this group would ever do? Can a teacher say, no, that's disrespectful to the president, it's going to disrupt our class discussions? So these are actually legit, I think, first free speech question.
Josh, can I add one other thing here?
Yes.
Of course, Colin Kaepernick and the symbolic speech, the problem is the NFL is probably not the state actor, though they act like one, but we have our president who called the players, I won't say this word, but you apparently have no problem whatsoever, he called them SOBs. Now, does that make it kind of like the state action? It's an interesting question, and no one's asked that, but they should. You want to respond? Because that's like
Can you speak into the microphone?
Huh?
Can you speak into the microphone?
I wasn't saying anything interesting at all. Believe me, I haven't lost anything. But basically, Colin Kaepernick, not state action. However, did the President of the United States, by calling them sons of bitches, did that make it something like a state action?
Yeah, there has been some reporting about the First Amendment in the context of the NFL and the folks wanting to kneel during the national anthem, and there have been some articles that have taken that on and explained that the First Amendment applies to state actors, it doesn't apply to private employers, and so it's really not a question of does the First Amendment protect the players or not, because the NFL is not a government agency and the teams aren't government agencies. But that doesn't mean, just like we were talking about earlier, there are some schools that are not government entities either, and yet they've adopted these policies about academic freedom and people being allowed to express their ideas. So it's still a very important discussion to have of should the players be allowed to do this or not. It's just not one in which the First Amendment plays a role.
Can we take some questions from the students? I've been talking way too much. Any questions, please raise your hand. Yes.
Okay.
You go to the microphone. Oh, perfect. Yes, exactly right.
Hi, Monique. It doesn't seem to be.
There you go.
Okay. Monique Natividad, 1L. I wanted to go back to the RAV versus. It's not on?
No.
Okay.
It's all right. You want to just come up here so we can hear you? I'll repeat your question. So if you come up, I'll be happy to repeat your question now. No, you have to yell. Just come right up here and ask your question. Approach the bench, Council.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
If you have more questions, just line up. Just get ready for it.
Yeah.
I like this. Yes, ma'am.
All right. So simply put, when you mentioned the RAV versus St. Paul, that touches home. I have family in St. Paul. I wanted to ask you, have you ever been the subject of a cross burning?
No,
Have you ever been the subject of a Klan rally? Okay, I have. So when I read that case, it touched something in me, and I wondered when you brought it up and you did the overview about how when it went to the Supreme Court, 9-0 they ruled against it. Oh, it's just how did you say? You said it was pure speech, and they were looking at it as pure speech, not the intent behind it, but it was intended to incite apprehension and fear. In order to put the cross on the lawn, they had to trespass. And so I was wondering, part of the reason perhaps that they weren't as successful, was it because it was a void for vagueness on the ordinance instead of focusing on the fear?
Yeah, very good question. Hope you all heard it. There was a follow-up case, Virginia versus, you don't know what I'm talking about, right? There was a case from 1999 2000, Virginia versus something, and it actually involved a cross-burning statute that was drafted a little bit more narrowly tailored.
Okay.
And that statute was upheld because of intent.
Okay.
Because it had to do with a certain type of malice behind the act. The St. Paul ordinance, I think, was almost like a negligence standard of how it was structured. So the problem wasn't punishing basically the creative apprehension, which you might call an assault, right, in the first year terminology. It's you have to have a specific intent behind it. So there are ways of punishing acts that create apprehension. So I'll give you this example: brandishing, right? In Texas, you can openly carry a firearm, right? That's legal. But if you go like this, hey, look what I got, okay? You're carrying a firearm. I don't have a gun here. I have a constitution, that's all I have. But showing this gun's like, hey, so the same exact act of carrying a firearm becomes a crime when it has a certain mens rea attached to it. So I think your question is exactly on point.
And you see that with modern hate crime statutes too, where the punishment is enhanced based on the intent behind it. So
And I do agree. I know that this was in 1992, and we've come a way since then. Because even now, you know, if you say certain things against LGBTQ and all of that, you have more of a punishment than perhaps would have been done at that time. So I do get different times, but I was wondering if it was that ambiguity, that void for vagueness type thing, because it is something, like I said, that is intended to put fear and apprehension in you. And I've been on the other side of that, and it is uncomfortable. And I do think it should be, you know, there should be a penalty for that. But thank you for answering my question.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Any other questions? About 10 minutes left. We move quickly.
What do we have to be out of here?
At 12:50.
Okay, sir. Please ask a question. Sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you. Greetings, my name is Tobe like Obe. My question is primarily for our two representatives here, Justice Brett Beasley and Professor Josh Blackman. As an African American male in your first year of law school, who makes willful attempts to express your First Amendment rights on numerous controversial topics, and while an expression may be misconstrued as threatening, in your experience, what is the most effective method to express your point as a counterparty to ensure your intended receiver understands your assertions, all while making sure the receiver or the message doesn't feel threatened and eliminate the moment for discussion?
Thank you, and please don't pack up. Just give me a minute. I'll try to answer this question. So I think the way you framed your question, Toby?
Tobe, like Obe.
Tobe. Okay. I think the way you framed your question is pretty good. If you approach someone respectfully, and you provide a background. Oh, even the question was asked a minute ago, right? She asked me a couple questions to get a frame of where I am. I answered her question, and then she gave me her point. And I think the way that was done was very effective. When you're giving someone some of a difficult topic, get them to relate to you, right? Explain it in a way that maybe they fit, maybe they don't, but if you explain to them in a general sense they can connect, you build a bond, right? I was saying, what's your name, right? What's your name? Even a simple question, what's your name? It's so disarming because it makes you, okay, now you're another human being, right? And also, you wrote your question out in advance. I think that's a smart move, right? Get your stuff clean. What you don't want to do, I'll answer the other part of this question. What you don't want to do is start yelling at people. You see these videos on YouTube, right? People start screaming at each other. No one's listening. Even on Twitter or social media, it's so easy to just burn someone and reply with some dumb message. Go talk to them in person, right? You're in a law school. You're all here. You're friends. If you're not friends, I don't know. But you're all here. Go talk to me one-on-one. Okay. They're telling me, they're about to give me the cane, yank me out, but I'm going to stay here as long as you want to answer your questions. And if you want to talk with me or anyone else, come on up.
We'll have to do that as well.
Thank you so much.